Welcome, everybody, to Leadership Lessons from Across the Pond with myself, Julian Roberts, and my dear friend and colleague all the way in New York, Nancy Halpern. Good to see you, Nancy.
Good to see you, Julian. You're looking good.
Thank you very much. Likewise, yourself.
Thank you.
Just to say, you see the headline about is the voice of the employee getting stronger and or more insistent on business decisions? We're talking about how we as leaders handle the voice of the employee in terms of them making an impact within the organization, and how we can sort of either take it more positively or how to handle that going forward with an organization to embrace in a leadership context. So Nancy, what are your thoughts on that? It's quite an open sort of question, really, isn't it?
Yes, but it's a very easy question to answer. The answer is yes. So done.
Well, I'm going to say yes and then. Yes and.
Oh, okay. Yes. And I think that what's really interesting is what is the voice getting stronger about, and on which kinds of business decisions? And is that something that you want to only focus primarily on responding to as it happens, and you want to encourage because you want people to have a greater voice? And or is it something that maybe some employees are actually stepping over the boundaries or bounds of their responsibility to influence decisions that you actually don't think they have enough experience to influence? And I think that's complicated by things such as social media platforms, where especially younger employees, if they don't like what you're doing as a company or feel you should take a stand, don't necessarily hesitate anymore to publicize that, as well as working from home for so long has made many people feel psychologically safer because they're home. And so having been in the office and watching action and people interact may have made them actually pull back a little more or gossip. Now everybody feels very emboldened in a way. So is that stronger voice, is it working in your favor, or is it creating problems for you? And is it doing both?
Yes, and I think there's a yes and a yes and a yes. I think there is a voice, and I agree with you. People are getting bolder, stronger in terms of what they say and how they say it. And I think the key thing to do is from my perspective, is how we harness that in a way it's for good, as opposed to, and that means dealing with the sort of ones that are slightly off-piste or slightly unhelpful for the organization. And it's how we go about it and to make it that actually we want your voice and we want you to post on social media, but there's almost like there's a framework or there's a boundary of how we go about that. And I guess for me, it's interesting. I remember when it sort of relates me to how I used to would lead people. I used to empower people, and in some ways, empowering people, giving people their voice, is sort of very broadly similar in terms of the sort of concept. And I remember talking to a lot of my direct reports, and the thing I always used to do is I used to empower people a lot. I was told for empowering people too much, which feels a bit anyway. And so my way of empowering
people.
People,
Julian, you're just too nice. You're
no, it's not being too much. Those boundaries. I always say to people, as long as it aligns to the company's values and purpose, what we're trying to achieve here, and as long as it's legal and as long as it's ethical, you make a decision. And I wanted people to make a decision in the moment, not just constantly going back to their boss all the time. So people feel truly empowered, really responsible, and the sense of they're part of this business and they're making decisions, within the level of their remit of what they're there for. Obviously, I'm not talking about making decisions on a 5 million ad campaign, which they have nothing to do with, if you know what I mean. I'm talking about within their sphere of influence. But them feeling free to do it because they know the values of the business, they know the purpose, they know what we're trying to achieve, and as long as it's legal, ethical, go off and make it. And that's how I used to empower people. That's how I used to create that sense of voice in that sense. And it's broader than that, but that's one way of going about it. And I guess what are your thoughts on that approach?
Well, you can see I was getting very thoughtful as you were speaking, because I was thinking we're talking about two different things. I think, I think you're speaking about something that every leader wants. He wants empowered people who don't do just their jobs, but feel confident and comfortable in expanding their roles and their responsibility. And there's a place where their voice and their opinion matters. And that's very important in every business. I think what I'm talking about is the sort of almost political power that here in the US I see employees exerting on their organizations. So here's an example that hasn't happened yet, but that I'm forecasting in my great inaccurate crystal ball. Right, lots of companies here in the U.S. are figuring out what it will look like when they go back to the office.
Mm.
Be that hybrid hours or staggered hours, or some teams are here, some teams aren't. What I don't think they've accounted for yet is every single employee is going to want to cut a deal, as my mother used to say, because they've been able to work from home for a year. And I think they're going to be a little resistant, more than their employer might foresee, of following the new procedure when what's going on for them has been in their control. And so I think that they're going to say to their company, well, you know something, actually, that doesn't work for me because my child's school has done X, or because actually my partner's this, or, well, why can't I just keep what I have? There's going to be so much individual negotiation that
Mm.
companies aren't foreseeing. Now, should the individual employee have the power to do that or not? I mean, we could argue that, well, no, they shouldn't because they still work for a company.
Mm.
But if they feel more emboldened these days, then uh, why would they not?
And I
Paul.
guess, well, what do you think? As I agree, I think there's a huge challenge with organisations where some people are going to say it's been working from home. Why do we need to go back? And there's that balance of we want to hear the voice of the employee, because if you hear the voice and have their value contribution, you get a sense of commitment from them and everything else, performance, employee engagement, all that sort of stuff. But then you have this other side of you have your business and how you run it. Now, I guess before I go into what I think, I just still want to thought, how would you handle that, or give advice to a leader or an organization who's facing almost a bit of a kickback from a number of employees, or quite a lot of them, who are saying we're not doing this? How would
Well,
you go about that?
I really like how you laid out the tension that exists. If you ask people their opinion and their thoughts, right, and then you don't act on them, they get really annoyed. Like,
Mm.
why did you ask me in the first place? Right. So I think that you have to know it. So my advice to a leader would be, it's almost like, I don't really play poker. I mean, I don't know how to play any of those games, but that's the metaphor that comes to mind in a way. Not that you want to game it, but you have to know what the table stakes are. You have to know what you can be flexible about and what you can't be flexible about. And I do think you have to have sort of, we're still in a period, hybrid really bothers me as a term, because I think what we really are in is a sort of bridge phase.
Mm.
And I don't think companies or a leader, so you pull me back if I digress here, I don't think they should be designing what it's going to look like now going forward for the next 5 years. I think they should be looking at what they're going to do for the next two. And so in that, I do think there has to be flexibility, right?
Mm.
I think they should have a standard package with a couple of options. And if someone comes to me and that doesn't suit them, then I think it was like the business. You used to have to make a business case for working remotely in the old days, right? I think it should have to be, we want to be empathetic. We also have a business to run. Tell us what the obstacle is to doing this, and let's see if we can help you problem solve. Now, that
Mm.
will only work if you have a small percentage of your employees wanting something different. If you have large scale pushback, then I think you have to go back to the drawing board at least a step or two and see, what do we do wrong? The other thing that smart companies are doing, I suspect, is they're surveying their population now. Know how much resistance you may have, because once you open up voice, you ask 1,000 people, you might get 1,000 different opinions. So I think you have to figure out what's going to work for the business, what most people want, and you may be compromising more than you had anticipated, which again is reflective of that greater voice of the employee and the increased power. What do you think, Julian?
Yeah, and I think it comes to a point. It's all about the approach, and I think you've said that. It's that how you go about it. It's not so much the definitives of the what and the now. It's the how we go about it. And for me, it's that engagement, and whether that is a more of a survey, because I've heard a lot of people doing that in terms of getting an understanding where people are at, but it's done in a way of really want to know what you think and trying to collect some, I guess, some data that will really on insights that will help them make some decisions. And I agree with you, you can't go too far out because we're still evolving out of this situation, and things are coming in and out, and second, third, fourth wave, all this sort of stuff's happening. So it's a little bit fluid still. But I think it's that keeping in mind of what the business is about and what you're trying to achieve as a business, and going back to that, whether it's your mission, vision, but whatever you determine in your biggest sort of driving force, what are your priorities as a business, what are your values, and just assessing everything in light of that and making sure they're really communicated. And when your employees are asking for fair flexibility, to say, look, does that fit what we're trying to achieve here? So it points it away from a leader, it points it to a bigger picture. And I can't think of an example right now, but if you had a sense of purpose, something, and they're trying to do something which literally would not help us achieve that purpose because people are working from home, for whatever example it is, and it could be you have to physically work together on this project, but we want to work from home, that wouldn't work. And it may mean you may have to make some decisions and people will have to leave. That's okay. That's fine.
Yeah.
But as long as it's done in a very way that's positive and say, look, this is our alignment. This is where we're going. We appreciate some fluidity. Yes, it's worked really well. But certain things we have to have here in place, and certain roles, certain positions have to be more office-based, et cetera, and then we'll review it as things go on, as we move forward, or we'll do some trials on something. We're not too sure about something, but if that doesn't fit, then let's move forward in a way that, okay, you can't be part of our purpose, and it keeps it really positive then, and it's not about they're not very nice, and then hopefully the employee will go away, they have to leave. We're just not aligned to the purpose, I can't do it, and they find somewhere else where they can actually fit their newfound flexibility, I guess, or their voice. So that's how I would approach it in terms of moving forward.
Not surprisingly, you have listed quite brilliantly, I think, 3 takeaways for leaders on this question. The first is transparency, right? Here's what we can do, here's what we can't do, and here's why. Number 2, empathy. People are really expecting leadership to be empathetic. They were during COVID, and they're not now done with that quality. And the third is adaptability. If you are rigid on the growing voice of the employee, you will not be an employer of choice, especially for younger workers. And so you have to demonstrate that kind of open-mindedness, because the assumption, especially for millennials, is they are working for an organization that has a purpose. It may not be saving the world, but there's a reason for it. And they're not willing to wait 10 years or even 5 years to find out what the purpose is. So I guess I would tack on a fourth, which is being able to communicate those core values and mission. And if you can't articulate them well as a leader, it's going to be tough to remain competitive when it comes to hiring, young, great, high energy driven talent.
Well, totally. And it's making it the whole conversation more strategic as opposed to very tactical. And that's the difference. And it's encasing it in something far bigger than just where we are right now. And I think that's where the conversation moves in a much more positive way and transformational way as well. So as always, our time is whizzing by, Nancy. I don't know where it goes. I thought we had a nice debate of thinking completely different poles apart at the start, which is always good. That's okay, but it gives us
more fun. And it's actually a huge topic.
It is actually. It's probably something we're going to come back to. I know we're going to talk about remote working and back to the office at some point in the future, next few weeks. So, well, thank you for here today, Nancy, and thank you anybody who's been listening in and commenting. We appreciate your support. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. See you next week.
See you next week.